This is the Merkava tank. Home-produced by Israel, it is the pride of the Israeli military and a symbol of its military might. It is one of the best protected tanks in the world.
I do know for sure what the Merkava is, what the Israel soldier is, and both of them can hit any other tanks and soldiers around us, no matter the numbers.
But in the modern warfare of today, guerrillas are challenging the role and the relevance of the Merkava.
A man in a ruined building with a handheld missile that was designed in the Soviet Union in the 1970s can still destroy the most up-to-the-minute digitized tank that the world has produced. And the Merkava is no exception to that.
On July 12, 2006, Hezbollah guerrillas in southern Lebanon moved across this border into Israel. Their target was a group of Israeli soldiers.
There was a unit of Israeli forces at the border. It was the last day of their duty. They were going home the next day. And no doubt, like all of us, perhaps they weren't following the instructions and their orders as precisely as they should. This was the opportunity that Hezbollah had been waiting for.
Hezbollah ambushed the Israeli unit. They killed 3 soldiers and captured the remaining 2, taking them back into Lebanese territory. The Israelis had in place a carefully worked out drill for exactly such a scenario.
Codename Hannibal was put into action. This is the drill which is implemented when soldiers are kidnapped.
Operation Hannibal involved the artillery and aerial bombardment of bridges and roads around the location of the capture. The aim was to prevent Hezbollah getting far with their captives. In the heat of the moment, a local Israeli commander ordered a Merkava tank into Lebanese territory to pursue the captors. Hezbollah was ready and waiting for such an eventuality.
After just a few meters of entering Lebanese territory, the tank ran over a landmine. It exploded, killing all 4 soldiers.
The tank and its crew had fallen into a well-laid Hezbollah trap.
What happened was a reckless decision by the commander in the field to send a Merkava to try to stop the hijacker.
A squad was sent to rescue the Merkava's crew. It was met by a Hezbollah ambush. There were more casualties. So early that day, in addition to the 2 who'd been kidnapped, Israel lost 8 soldiers. This is not an easy thing for Israel.
The losses enraged the Israelis. A cabinet meeting was hastily convened.
They decided to go to war after the chief of staff came to the cabinet and he presented his plan and he said, give me 5 days. With the Air Force alone, we are going to crash the Hezbollah. There will be no fighting capability of the Hezbollah. So they gave him 5 days.
"5 days proved to be an overconfident estimation of Israel's ability to crush Hezbollah. Israel continued to come under attack from Hezbollah rockets. Israel's relentless bombing campaign was not working.
It didn't succeed because Hezbollah had been preparing for this prospect. It had been preparing by building bunkers, tunnels, using caves.
No one, not even the Israelis, knew anything about this network of tunnels, 20 to 30 meters deep in places, They had everything inside them: rocket launchers, ammunition, food, water, all they needed.
After 8 days of aerial bombing, and with Hezbollah still firing rockets, Israel decided to send ground troops into Lebanon. Israel had withdrawn its troops from the occupation of Lebanon only 6 years earlier. Now the Israelis were going back in, supported by columns of Israel's celebrated Merkava tank. The Merkava was the pride of Israel's armored corps. The Israelis considered it to be the best tank in the world. But it was to face stiff resistance from Hezbollah guerrillas.
The problem was that in front of the Merkava was little units, soldiers, foot soldiers, with anti-tank missile. And even the Merkava couldn't handle the advance of the new anti-tank missile. Even the Merkava can't do it.
The Israelis were surprised by Hezbollah's new weaponry. The modern Russian-made anti-tank missiles Hezbollah was using had been acquired from Syria and Iran. Hezbollah was using them with deadly effectiveness. The Lebanon war was going increasingly high-tech.
Israel
developed the Merkava and turned it into a symbol of Israeli military technology. It showed it off to all the armies of the world. It became a legend. And so, in response to this, Hezbollah acquired weapons with the aim of destroying the Merkava. They developed, and we developed too, and we surprised them.
Hezbollah fighters were waiting in tunnels and bunkers. To the surprise of the Israelis, they kept emerging like ghosts to strike the tanks entering Lebanese villages.
Hezbollah was waiting for the tanks, and they knew exactly how to hit them. They knew exactly where the soft spots are, and they use missiles, and we have lost several of the tanks and a lot of soldiers.
Such losses were of great concern to the Israelis. The Merkava tank was a powerful symbol of Israel's military superiority. Yet well-armed and well-trained Hezbollah guerrillas were firing at the tanks from very close range and scoring direct hits. It seemed as if the ghosts of a past war were coming back to haunt the Israelis.
The Israelis were facing another war, a war like that of 73. Its opponents had determination and modern weapons, and so the Merkava was in a situation against Hezbollah fighters similar to that of Israeli tanks against Egyptian infantry in 73.
The 1973 Arab-Israeli War was known by the Arabs as the October War and by the Israelis as the Yom Kippur War. It had been a painful lesson for Israel, and in particular the Israeli Tank Corps. 6 years earlier, the Israelis had comprehensively defeated the Arab armies in the Six-Day War. However, by 1973, the Egyptians had rearmed, mindful of Israel's mastery of tank warfare.
The Soviet Union supplied us with large numbers of anti-tank guided missiles. They were distributed to all levels of Egyptian infantry units.
The Israeli Tank Corps at that time consisted of American-made Patton and British-made Centurion tanks, which the Israelis had upgraded. Israel did not yet have its own tank. On October the 6th, 1973, thousands of Egyptian soldiers crossed the Suez Canal in an attempt to reclaim the Sinai captured by Israel 6 years earlier. The Israelis sent in their tanks to repel the attack.
The Israelis expected that the Egyptian infantry would run away as soon as a tank approached, but this time no one was running.
The Israelis attacked in their usual tactics, and they were met by an incredible barrage of handheld anti-tank wire-guided missiles.
This was the first time in history the anti-tank guided missiles had been used in war.
They lost many tanks, and this was a shock to them. We learned later that most of the Egyptians who came over, those kids, were carrying an anti-tank missile.
The Soviet-made wire-guided anti-tank missiles used by the Egyptians proved stunningly effective. Israel lost hundreds of tanks during the 1973 war. This cemetery in Tel Aviv holds the graves of many of those tank crewmen killed in that war. The Israelis had paid a high price for failing to take heed of new innovations in anti-tank weaponry. This sobering experience was the catalyst for a momentous decision. Israel would build its own tank, a tank that would become known as the Merkava. A telling symbol of the high price paid by the Israeli Tank Corps in the 1973 war can be seen here at the Armed Forces Museum at Latrun, just outside of Jerusalem. This wall lists the names of all Israeli tank crew members killed in all of Israel's wars, starting from 1948. The largest section of this wall is devoted to those killed in the 1973 war. Israel was determined never again to lose so many casualties. After the war, the Israelis formed a committee to work on the design of a new tank, a tank specially designed to counter the tactics and the weapons of Israel's enemies. A former commander of the Israeli armed forces was charged with leading the development team. His name was General Israel Tal.
What was unique about Israel Tal was that he was intelligent, but also egotistical. He wanted to show the Israeli people and the whole world that he could design the perfect tank, a tank which could never be hit by any missile, and which could hit any soldier, whoever he was.
A genius when it comes to tanks, one of the leading experts in the world.
He was the guy who think and, as a matter of fact, push the whole idea to the tank until the very first tank. It was like a personal crusade for him.
The design of the Merkava placed a premium on the survival of the crew. One of the tank's most important features was that, unlike other tanks, the engine was at the front rather than at the rear. This meant the crew would be sitting behind the engine when the tank was moving forward.
It's innovation as a kind of protection. This is protection for the crew. It's a very nice idea.
The idea was that every piece of equipment in that tank, not just the armour, should be used to defend the crew.
Having a forward engine also allowed extra space for infantry. Unlike other tanks, the Merkava doubled as a troop transporter. Its rear door design enabled up to 6 fully equipped soldiers to be carried safely into combat. The rear door also provided an escape route.
The tank plays a secondary role as an armored personnel carrier. The infantry can leave the tank, fight anti-tank crews, and clear the way for the tank to advance.
The new design contained other innovative features. It was lower than other tanks, making it a more difficult target. Crucially, the tank was plated with special reactive armor.
The tank was 63 tons, heavier than any other tank in the world. But Israel Tal said, "I don't care about maneuverability. All I care about is protecting my crew."
The crew compartment was very luxurious, with air conditioning, cold drinking water and extra space for the crew. The soldier in the Merkava is definitely the most comfortable soldier in any tank in the world.
With the design complete, the new tank needed a name that, like the tank itself, would strike fear into Israel's enemies. The name chosen was Merkava.
It was attended by biblical phantoms of power. I mean, it was a highly modern piece of cutting-edge technology, but it was also expressed in sort of archaic biblical terms. I mean, the word Merkava, it means chariot, but it also implies God. It's about theology. It's the word of God on tracks, tearing over the terrain.
With its religious reference, the Merkava, or God's chariot, was to be a weapon offering a divine-like protection to Israel, and one that would smash its enemies.
When the Israelis used the word with religious connotations for the Merkava, they took it out of its historical context. They surrounded it with an aura. It became unique, terrifying, almost untouchable.
In 1979, the Merkava Mark I rolled off the assembly line, ready for action. Ironically, it was that same year that Israel made peace with Egypt, the country that in 1973 had provided the catalyst for the Merkava project. However, the Israelis were not slow to find other reasons to justify the importance and the cost of developing the Merkava.
The Merkava is some kind of an independence flag we wave. We need it for, in case of other countries will sanction us or embargo us, we needed to maintain our policy. Even other countries oppose us.
And it wasn't long before Israeli policy had need of the Merkava. In 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon in order to crush Palestinian guerrillas there and to install a friendly government in Beirut. The Merkava was put into action for the first time. The new Merkava formed the spearhead of the Israeli advance into Lebanon. The Israelis soon reached the outskirts of the capital, Beirut, but it wasn't all easy going. In eastern Lebanon's Beqa Valley, a column of Israeli tanks ran into a Syrian force near the village of Sultan Yaqub, just south of the main Beirut-Damascus highway. The local mayor was an eyewitness to what happened next. He showed us the site where the fierce tank battle took place here in the early hours of June the 11th, 1982.
The Israelis were coming from this direction, heading towards the Beirut-Damascus highway. Here was the battlefield. It was a horrible night. I will never forget it.
The Syrians later claimed to have destroyed over 20 Israeli tanks. This memorial was erected on the spot where the Syrians managed to halt the Israeli advance.
The Syrians surprised the Israelis by using the new Soviet-made T-72 tank in the Battle of Sultan Yaqub. It was much better in its caliber and range than the Merkava Mark I.
Despite the setback of Sultan Yaqub, the Merkava was judged to have performed well. It had reduced the level of Israeli losses.
The Merkava was a success in 1982. The casualty figures were far lower than in the 1973 war.
But the Israeli losses in Lebanon meant that the Merkava was still not the supreme tank General Israel Tal had dreamed of. As a result, the Israelis went back to the drawing board. They made upgrades to the original Merkava. The Merkava Mark II was created in 1983. 7 years later, the Merkava Mark III appeared. The new features included a higher caliber gun and armor upgrades. But as the tank underwent upgrades over the years, large-scale tank warfare was beginning to look more a thing of the past. 1991 witnessed the collapse of the Soviet Union. For decades, the chief military supplier of Israel's Arab opponents. And that same year, another threat to Israel, the army of Iraq, was seriously weakened in the Gulf War. In the Merkava, Israel had arguably one of the best tanks in the world, but who was it designed to be used against?
Military planners have a fatal tendency in all states and regimes to plan for the last war. They don't plan for the next one. The problem is that the next sort of war that comes along is not about large masses of tanks meeting on an open plain. You know, it's not Hollywood. It's suddenly guerrilla warfare. It's controlling civilian populations who are finding all sorts of ways of getting back at you that are nothing to do with high-tech machines. So basically the Merkava was designed for a moment that passed during the same period as the design process was going ahead.
The Israelis refused to consider the Merkava obsolete. Israel was spending roughly $220 million a year on the Merkava tank program. Its continued use was seen as maintaining Israel's military edge. The Merkava was soon given a new role, not in the open field of battle, but in the densely packed civilian neighborhoods of the West Bank and Gaza, following the eruption of the Second Palestinian Intifada in the year 2000. Israel's high-tech battle tank was to face a new challenge.